Good afternoon. I am Melanie White, President of the Women's Club. Welcome to all the members in the auditorium, and welcome to our members viewing online. Following today's program, please join us in the Halsey Hall to meet David Ignatius. Now, I believe he needs to leave at 3:30, so make the most of your time with him. All right, I did a dance last week. I don't know what else to do, but please silence your cell phones. I counted, I think, 4 that went off. Get it out of your purse. Power it off if you don't know how to turn it off. Thank you. There's so many wonderful opportunities coming up to connect with the Women's Club. Visit the Virginia Holocaust Museum on January 15th from 10:30 to 12:30. Registration deadline is January 8th, 2026. Let's Talk Politics with Jim Bacon and Bob Lewis is on January 21st at 11:45. Registration deadline is January 14th. Please note, this is a members-only event. On this Monday before Thanksgiving, I am so grateful for the faithful work and great care our staff and board members have given our club. I would like to give a very special thank you to Nancy Ambler for serving as our recording secretary when Becky Clark unexpectedly and so very suddenly passed away recently. Thank you to the volunteer committee for providing our refreshments today. Thank you to Robin Hurst for serving as chair of the day. Robin will now introduce David Ignatius.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to this wonderful program that we are going to have today with a very exciting speaker, journalist, and author, David Ignatius. David is going to speak with us about Cybergeddon, fact, fiction, and the future of warfare. So while we're not in our lovely bowling hacks hall house, we are in this fabulous space at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And it is so exciting for me to see so many seats that are filled with exciting faces and people that are very excited about being here and being part of our program. And I think you'll really love this. We had a wonderful lunch, very exciting to hear. But our speaker, David Ignatius, is a preeminent foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Post, as well as author of 12 books. I know. He's covered politics, economics, the Middle East, and the secret world of intelligence and the CIA for nearly 4 decades. And a lot of his experiences as a journalist are included in little tidbits into his novels. So you'll get a real feel for what's actually going on in these spaces that he is writing about and in the Washington Post as well. So this is very interesting too. So it's been said that few people understand espionage culture as well as Ignatius. So his Washington Post column has published twice weekly for the past 15 years, and it's earned him several prestigious awards, including the Overseas Press Club Award, Gerald Loeb Award for commentary, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Center for Journalists. In 2019, Ignatius won a special George Polk Award for his coverage, actually 9 articles, of the killing of the Post columnist and his friend, Jamal Khashoggi. And that was actually in the news, Wall Street Journal anyway, last week when the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia visited the White House. So I thought that was very interesting and very timely. So he's also the best-selling author of spy thrillers, and they blur the lines between fact and fiction. And that includes Body of Lies, which was turned into a film starring Russell Crowe and Leonardo DiCaprio. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I'm sure it's a great film. And also his newest book, Phantom Orbit. And you can find that book out in the auditorium lobby if you wish to purchase a copy and have our author sign it for you today. So, his illustrious career can't be summed up in just a few sentences that I was able to give to you today, but it just really does not do justice. And I think you'll enjoy our speaker today. But before I introduce him, we learned one very interesting fact at lunch today. So several years ago, and he never admitted the number of years ago, he was asked to write the libretta to Prince, which is about Machiavelli, and it was commissioned in Amsterdam. Now, I had to ask Melanie, who's our opera specialist, so what is a libretta? I don't know. Many of you probably already know, but essentially it's the story. It's the actual story that then the musicians and the composers make into the opera. So, so very exciting to hear that. And he said it was a success, and his wife held his hand. So, so that was great. So, without further ado, please join me in a warm welcome to our speaker today, David Ignatius.
So thanks to Robin and to Melanie. My opera is called The New Prince, and it imagines a new edition of The Prince, maybe the greatest work of political philosophy ever, that's issued on the 500th anniversary of Machiavelli's death. And if you're wondering why on earth was a journalist asked to write this, the answer is, I have no idea. It came out of the blue when the composer called me. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone. It's wonderful to be in Richmond. I'm grateful to Robin, to Melanie, to everybody in this club. This is the second time that I've been asked to speak to the Women's Club, earlier in your beautiful headquarters. Richmond is special for me because my best friend in college, and still, Garrett Epps, is a Richmonder. People remember, I hope, AC, his late father, Roseanne, his mother, his brothers Gus and his wife Ellen, and Johnny and Patty, and their kind of the narrative of my life is woven around the Epps family and visits to Richmond. So it's great to be here with you. So I want to talk about warfare, not the happiest Thanksgiving subject, and I do want to talk about warfare in the future. But I want to ground that in talking about wars as I've experienced them as a correspondent through my career and what I've learned from them, and then what I took from what I'd seen as a journalist and wove into the fiction of these 12 novels, and take you through to the work that I've done in recent years, which is about the new weapons that the person who gave this lecture, its name, not me, called Cybergeddon. So just to begin this where it began for me, in 1980, I was engaged to be married to the woman who I just celebrated my 45th wedding anniversary with. It was September 1980. The Iraq-Iran war started in late September. Our wedding date had been set for October 18. And I said to my soon-to-be bride, I have to go cover this. I had never covered conflict. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't speak Arabic. It was like completely kind of rookie move. But I went off pell-mell, flew to Baghdad. Baghdad was being bombed, so I flew instead to Kuwait City, got a taxi and went to Basra in southern Iraq, and watched a conflict that in so many ways was primitive. It was born of the arrogance and ambition of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who truly believed that he would be in Tehran in a few weeks. The Iranian Revolution had just happened. He was just full of confidence. He'd been egged on by all the Gulf Arabs who were terrified of the Iranian Revolution. Such was the confidence of the Iraqis that they allowed journalists like me who'd come into Basra just to take taxis. We'd get a ferry across the Shatt al-Arab waterway and go into Iran. I can remember being told to go spend the night in a city called Khorramshahr, which was a few dozen miles east in Iran. We claimed the person at the Iraqi forward artillery position said, "We've just taken it," went roaring off through the sand in this taxi, only to find that halfway down the road, the shell fire wasn't going out, it was coming in. And in fact, they hadn't taken it and didn't take it for another few weeks. So that war was full of illusions. If there's one thing I've learned in my career, it's that illusion about what you can do militarily is a feature of just every war that I've covered. And I think the kind of abiding lesson for me is, as I'll explain. So after trying to learn how to be a foreign correspondent on the fly, I managed to get back just before my wedding day. Thank goodness, that would not have been a good move. Was forgiven by my bride-to-be, and then took her off to London, found an apartment for us, and then went to Beirut, where I spent most of the next 3 years covering the Lebanese Civil War and then the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and its aftermath. And that was a life-changing event in many ways, but one in particular that I want to just mention because it's what made me a novelist. In 1980, in that summer, getting ready to go overseas, I took somebody who'd worked in the Carter administration out to lunch. And that person said, "You know, the Israelis just killed our man in the PLO." And I said, "What? What do you mean?" "Oh, I shouldn't have said that. He must have done it intentionally." Didn't take long to figure out that he must have been talking about somebody who had been assassinated the previous year. It was a celebrated case. Israel really bragged about it, whose name was Abu Hassan Salameh. And he was the chief of intelligence of the PLO. He was their top spy. And so I went off to Beirut knowing that in some mysterious way, this man had been our man in the PLO. What could that possibly mean? So I spent parts of the next 2 years pulling on the thread of that first little bit of information. Sometimes journalists go off half-cocked, and we want to swing for the fences, and right before we really know the story. In this case, thank goodness, I held off until I began to really learn what had happened. And in February of 1983, a long time after I first heard the information, the Wall Street Journal published on its front page a story that began with President Jimmy Carter being informed in 1979 about the assassination of this guy who'd been killed by a car bomb in Israel, and about all of the things he'd done in cooperation with the CIA over a decade. So that caused quite an uproar, as you can imagine, in the Middle East. 2 months later, April 1983, the man who had run that operation, whose name was Robert Ames, one of the really legendary CIA officers of his time, came to Beirut. He was by then a senior official, went to visit his colleagues in the American embassy. As it happened, I went to the embassy to interview the deputy military attaché to ask him what the heck all those U.S. Marines were doing at the airport. Nobody could quite explain what their mission was. You may remember that several hundred of them ended up dead when a bomb went off. I left the embassy that day at 12:30, and just after 1 o'clock, I got back to my hotel and heard the loudest explosion I'd ever heard in Beirut. Which is saying something. Went running down the hill and looked at the remains of the American embassy, just the shell of the building. A car bomb had been driven right to the gate. Back then, it's hard to imagine, there was no security. You drove off the Corniche, the boulevard along the Mediterranean, turned into the American embassy, and that's what this person did in a truck laden with explosives, and blew the embassy apart and killed the man who had run this amazing operation, who had recruited the leading terrorist of his day and made him an instrument of American intelligence, and everybody who was in the CIA station in Beirut that day. So in the aftermath of that, the Lebanese and Arabs that this guy had recruited and worked with, in their grief over his death, needed to talk to somebody. And I was the only person around who knew about all this, because I've been asking questions about it, you'll remember, for 2 years, knocking on every door I could. So I began to learn just a quality of information that I really had no business knowing, that journalists really shouldn't learn. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do with this? And I decided the only answer was to write a novel. And so that's how I got started. The book was published in 1987. On the way, it was rejected by every single publisher of note in the country, often with very sort of, snide, I'll say. How interesting that you would, as a journalist, would think that you could write a novel. That's one of the really dismissive ones. But it was published. I had managed to rewrite it enough times that those first rejection letters were, which were probably accurate, no longer were. And lo and behold, it had an initial success and continues to be read. The CIA, I'm told, hands it out to young case officers to this day, because it's just such a accurate. But it's no virtue for me as a writer. It's just the fact is it's all true. It's all what really happened, and so it still has a popularity. So that's how I got started as a novelist. If you want to read that book, you'll be struck, among other things, by how similar the story of our involvement in Lebanon, the promises we made, the admirable naivete of our commitment, and then our lack of staying power when times got tough, is just so illustrative of a story that we've seen again and again. I mean, that's really our modus operandi. I hate to say it. I said once, we're the love 'em and leave 'em guys. We go in to places like Lebanon and Iraq and Afghanistan with big ideas about how we're going to transform everything. And then inevitably the going gets very tough. And try as we might, we just don't have the staying power to see it through. And the one lesson of that is we should be much more careful about getting involved in the first place. I'll come back to Ukraine in a moment, but I have a terrible feeling that we're watching a version of that story, the love 'em and leave 'em story, play out right now. But as I say, we'll come back to that. So that was my first novel. The 1990s happily were a time of peace, relatively speaking. There was a Gulf War. I was then foreign editor of the Washington Post and oversaw our coverage, which won a Pulitzer Prize. that year. But it was the decade in which the Soviet Union came down. America really did win the Cold War. My second novel was about the way in which the CIA encouraged the dissolution of the Soviet Union, going into the Muslim republics, shipping in Quran, sponsoring fundamentalist groups that would challenge the regime with unintended consequences that we ended up learning, resuming operations in the Baltic states, in Georgia, in Armenia. So that novel told the story of all these operations along the arc of the Soviet Union that were successful. It's called Zero. Then, as we remember, still painfully, we entered the September 11, 2001 era, the era of counterterrorism operations, counterterrorism wars, if that's the right way to think about Iraq and Afghanistan. I wrote the novel that Robin mentioned called Body of Lies about the CIA's war against al-Qaeda. It came out of a conversation with then CIA Director George Tenet, somebody I still have a great respect for as a commander, if you will, of our efforts to deal with al-Qaeda. He ended up having a difficult moment with Iraq, and his famous slam dunk comment about the inaccurate, as it turned out, intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. But I said to him, George, explain to me how, what the agency is doing to get inside al-Qaeda and to know what al-Qaeda may have coming at us. And he said, our best approach is to work through our partners, and the best partner in this is Jordan. And when you next go to Jordan, go see the king and ask him if you can see his head of intelligence. Because this guy, George is very enthusiastic. He said, this guy is unbelievable. His name was Saad Khair. And so I knew King Abdullah already, went to see him, said, dropped George Tenet's name and said, he urged me to go see this gentleman. And lo and behold, I did, and spent some weeks talking to him and his colleagues, and that produced the material for this book, Body of Lies. If you've seen the movie, you'll remember maybe one scene in particular, which again, like so much of my fiction is taken from life. In real life, the head of Jordanian intelligence, then a senior operations officer, had found somebody who was on the periphery of al-Qaeda, a Jordanian, who was at that time living in an East European city, tracked him down there, knocked on his apartment door. Man opens the door. Saad sticks his foot in the door so he can't close it, hands him a cell phone, and says, "Talk to your mother." And on the other end of the phone was this man's mother back in Amman. And she says, "My darling, I always knew that you would be a success. My new apartment is so beautiful. And this refrigerator and television set, everything I've always wanted and dreamed of, I have, thanks to you." Jordanian intelligence has found her, has set her up, has done all this just to set up that moment. When you hand the cell phone through the door and say, "Talk to your mother." I mean, if you want to think about what's an intelligence operation really about, that's it. Think of all the work that went into that one moment. So, needless to say, with that moment, this man is hooked. He's recruited, and from what I know, what turned out to be an extremely helpful penetration, moving ever closer to al-Qaeda's leadership and providing the kind of intelligence that kept us safe. So, that for me again was a learning lesson about the basics of this craft. I wrote another novel about the counterterrorism wars called Blood Money, set in Pakistan in the tribal areas. I'll just mention one aspect of it because it ends up being relevant to my larger theme. That book opens with somebody whose family is on the periphery of Al-Qaeda, who himself has nothing to do with it, under a drone attack in the tribal areas. And it just describes what it's like, how you see that little twinkle of sunlight off the body of the drone, and then you begin to hear the sort of whining buzz of the drone's engine, and then the next thing you know, everything around you is obliterated. And that experience was shared by so many people in so many parts of the world. It's a tough legacy of those wars. We suffered terrible harm in our country, but the aftermath is worth thinking carefully about. It taught the whole world how powerful drones and drone warfare are. So I want to turn from that, obviously, to the war in Ukraine, which is a drone war in so many ways. I've been in Ukraine 7 times since the war began and tried to cover it as well as I can, and which would make an initial observation that Ukraine is, in a really monstrous way, a combination of the most primitive, basic aspects of warfare. Think of World War I and people in trenches, fighting with enormous loss of life to move a quarter mile, to move the front, just a fraction. And that's what the war in Ukraine has been like, especially for Russia. Russia, the British intelligence estimates that Russia has suffered 1.1 million casualties in Ukraine. More dead than in every other war Russia has fought since World War II. It's a stunning number. And has not, in the now nearly 4 years of the war, even managed to take all of Donetsk province in Ukraine. The front line continues to be, it's like Verdun. It advances by, not by inches, but by tiny fractions of space. So it's this primitive war, but to deal with Ukraine's lack of manpower, it was heavily overmatched, obviously, by Russia. Ukraine began from the early days of the war to use drones to substitute for people. So the front now, from people who go there all the time, who I have not been in the middle of this myself, but this is what they say it looks like. In the immediate front of this war, there is essentially a wall of drones. There's a wall of death. And if you move during daytime or nighttime, because they have optical sensors that can see you, you're likely to be killed. People simply can't move. They move at dusk. There's a brief period when the sensors just don't see you very well, right before the sun comes up and right as the sun is going down. And that's the moment you can move. You can't even collect your dead because it's so dangerous. So the Ukrainians have invented robots that go out, ground robots that go out and help pick up these poor wounded soldiers who can't make it back. It's a horror. I said monstrous early on. I don't think that overstates this conflict. So it's pre-modern and super modern at the same time. We're now right in the middle of an effort by President Trump and his colleagues to try to end this war. I've been writing about it intensely this last few days. From the beginning, I've applauded many things about President Trump I don't like, but his desire to end this war, I entirely endorse. His seeming willingness to lean toward the aggressor, Russia, I think is dreadful. It's just a terrible mistake that we'll regret for decades if we do it. I've been writing the last couple days about the need to correct the initial plan that was proposed for this latest push to end the war. And if you want to help the Washington Post, you'll go look at the column that I wrote Saturday night after talking to people, what did I say? People close to the negotiations, I think was the phrase I used, which described as of late Saturday, 2 days ago, how in reaction to the intense protest by many people, including me, that we were essentially leaning toward Russia, they had decided to go to Geneva, where they were yesterday, and offer an amended version of this plan that made many more efforts to protect Ukraine and its sovereignty. And in this column, I noted his assurances that the U.S. will be 100% committed to continuing to supply Ukraine with U.S. intelligence, which is the single most important thing they need to protect themselves and stay alive. So anyway, it's just an example of how, if you're in my business, you just watch these things unfold in real time, and maybe have a way, just by giving as accurate an account as you can, of helping people get to a better solution. I think this column, this person's willingness to tell me exactly what they were doing, and then people reading that overnight may have helped in some small way shape the discussions that took place yesterday and the now, I think, much more favorable, less pro-Russian version of this peace effort that's going forward. I've written that the Ukraine war is in some ways an algorithm war, in that the targeting that's used by the Ukrainians, now the Russians, is all run through overhead satellite reconnaissance that's digitized and then fed into firing systems that, thanks to AI, can see exactly what's on the ground, no matter what the weather is, no matter what the camouflage is, can see through that, distinguish what the object is, and then with the precise coordinates, fire on it. When I say U.S. intelligence is crucial to the Ukrainians' ability to survive, that's what I mean. I mean, it gives them the precise location of the people who were attacking them. And it's also, in addition to the algorithm war, it's the first space war. People don't really think about it, but Ukraine could not survive, couldn't operate without the satellites that Elon Musk, love him or hate him, his Starlink satellites are the command and control system for the Ukrainian military. They could not send and receive orders, coordinate these fires, without the Starlink, in effect, Wi-Fi from overhead. So what did the Russians try to do early in the war? Take out these satellite internet systems from the ground. They didn't shoot down the satellites, but by late 2022, their representative at the UN said Russia will regard commercial satellites in space that are being used for these purposes as legitimate targets. And if you thought they were just bluffing, well, last year they launched a satellite. This ended up being disclosed in February of last year by Representative Mike Turner, head of the House Intelligence Committee, that was designed to carry a nuclear warhead that, if it exploded, would generate a kind of EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that would disable every satellite that passed through that zone in low Earth orbit. It's not that the explosion would destroy the satellites, although that would be another problem. It's that the disabling effects of this radiation and energy would render low Earth orbit for a time unusable. So the Russians haven't actually put that up yet, so far as we know, but they have created all the capability that would allow them to do that. So I just want to say a little bit more about this theme of where warfare is going. In cyberspace, former head of the National Security Agency, our code-breaking agency, said to me once, you know, David, we think of war as an on-off switch. You're either at war or you're not at war, right? I mean, that's like how we all think of it. He said, for us in the cyber world, it's a rheostat, and we're constantly shifting it. And the truth is, it's always at about 3. In other words, in his phrase, we are always in a state of persistent engagement. That's the kind of polite, you know, NSA military speak term for this state of always being at war in cyberspace, which means we're always inside their networks, they're always inside ours. The Chinese are particularly adept at this. And if you've read the newspapers, you know that the Chinese had an operation called Salt Typhoon, which penetrated into the heart of the administrative systems, the command and control of every major U.S. telecom provider. Whatever your cell phone is, its system has been penetrated by the Chinese, allowing them capability. We don't know all the information that they took. The Chinese have had another operation to get inside all of our basic infrastructure, power, water, probably banking, and pre-position malware whose effects, we're not sure about, to get ready for the moment when they might need to use them. So, we think of cyber war as, well, what would happen if in the future? It's already happened. And it's already, the ground has been laid. And it's an unfortunate truth. I'm going to write about this in another week or so. It's proving almost impossible to stop malware attacks, ransomware attacks that are much more common than is publicly acknowledged. Law firms, financial institutions don't really want to tell you that they've been attacked and compromised, but they are on a regular basis, and it's proving almost impossible for the standard cyber defense companies to stop them. So there's a lot of creative thinking going on about what on earth do we do in this state where we're just so vulnerable. I mean, think of your life. Is there anything of consequence you do that doesn't touch digital communications? And increasingly, for most of us, the answer is no. And so there's this tremendous exposure, and our adversaries, unfortunately, understand that. Looking at this world, maybe a decade ago, I decided that in my own fiction, I needed to move away from the kind of novels that I'd been writing and look much more at technology. That in espionage and warfare, we weren't in the era of James Bond. We were in the era of zeros and ones. We were in the era where the digital systems mattered the most. So my last 4 novels have really been about technology. One called The Director, which is about somebody very much like Edward Snowden, a kind of hacker, penetrator. I actually wrote it before Snowden came out. I had my first draft in hand. Then here's Edward Snowden, and I realized, my God, real life is so much more interesting than my book. And I showed my wife, who's always my first reader, what do you think? And she read it, and it's a truth about life. We always want people to say, that's really great. We want honest opinions from people we trust, so long as they're favorable. God bless her. She said, I think it needs some work, which it did. So and then it was due yesterday. So had another insane week and tore it up and made it a book that I was actually proud of. I wrote a book called The Quantum Spy after that. My risk tolerance, is high in terms of writing about things I have no real quantum computing. Are you kidding? But I wrote a novel about the U.S.-Chinese competition to steal each other's secrets in this incredible technology that's coming at us of quantum computing. And you all have heard the usual description. The computers are made of bits that are either 0 and 1, and a qubit, a quantum bit, is simultaneously 0 and 1. It's like a coin that's flipping, and you don't know whether it's heads or tails till it lands, but it's both and everything in between as it spins. Well, that's what quantum computers will be able to do. And so there's a wild race to get there first. The book I wrote after that is called The Paladin. It's about deep fakes, which we're now seeing in just go on the internet and you'll see something that's manufactured. Deep fakes are now eerily capable of rendering all of our images. Let's just hope our intelligence agencies figure out ways to discriminate between created images and real ones. And then my most recent book that I mentioned earlier, called Phantom Orbit, which is about space weapons, has a lot about the Ukraine war and how that's really our first space war. I'd be happy to say, if in answer to questions, more about space weapons. I've talked a lot about that at lunch with some of your colleagues, but I don't want to talk too much about that. Now, just to close, a couple of thoughts. So everywhere we turn right now, in this moment, we're discussing artificial intelligence and how it will be applied to everything that we do. All the work that a law firm does generating legal documents. So that'll be better done by an AI. My wife of 45 years is a computer scientist. She has a doctorate in computer science. She does defense research. I don't really know what she does because she can't tell me. But I do know that soon, AIs are just much better at writing code than human beings are, even people who really are good at it, like my wife. So, that job specialty that people thought they were being so brilliant learning how to code, sorry, that's actually yesterday's job. You look around and it's a very useful exercise to think, well, as I think about my grandchildren's careers and try to meddle and plan their lives, what are the things that won't be replaceable? But certainly the application of AI to warfare will create a kind of warfare that will be potentially destructive in a way that is, I want to say unimaginable, but artificial intelligence will imagine it and will be capable of carrying it out. Agentic AI will have the ability not simply to think and plan more diabolically than any human being ever did, but to carry it out, to create and use the tools that will make it happen. So there was never a time in which thinking about control of weapons was more important. As Henry Kissinger was nearing his death, this became his obsession. Kissinger wrote 2 books about AI in his last years. I knew Kissinger well over many years and was lucky enough to interview him for a program that I was doing at the Washington National Cathedral, and that's what he wanted to talk about, was how on earth do human beings get control of these systems. He spent most of his career thinking about nuclear weapons. He had become convinced it was this AI systems that would drive, strategize the use of nuclear weapons that was the real issue. I want to leave time for questions. We have 15 minutes left. I hope that's enough time. I just want to say again what a pleasure it is to be here in Richmond, which is a special place for me, and to be a guest of this club, which has such a wonderful history. You think of institutions that make a difference, and this club obviously is one of them. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions. I don't know how I see. Yes, ma'am. There's a woman, there's a mic runner who's coming toward you.
Why do you think that Trump is leaning so far towards Putin as far as Ukraine is concerned, and definitely siding and giving Putin so much more advantage?
So there's a range of possibilities here. To put it mildly, the most extreme would involve the idea that Russia has some leverage over him. I've never really been convinced of that. I can't imagine someone that a foreign intelligence service would be less likely to recruit. So I just don't. I mean, I hear it, but I just don't believe it. So, what other reasons? Well, Trump has been a Russophile since the 1980s. I once, during his first term, did a long examination of all of his efforts to do business in Russia. It's just been, been a thing for him from the very beginning. That may be part. He has an idea which most analysts think is just completely wrong, that Russia's a gold mine in the future, that Russia will have, be the $1 trillion opportunity, and let's get there. And, Russia is a country in radical decline. Russia's on its way to being a vassal state of China. Russia's not a prize. It's an encumbrance in so many ways, but that's not the way that Trump views it. Then I want to credit the part of this that I find appropriate, which is Trump in his statements about this war focuses on the human cost, and he obviously gets intelligence briefings regularly that bring that home to him. And he'll talk about it sometimes. He'll say 5,000 people died last week. He'll talk about the total casualty numbers. He'll talk about the killing field. He'll talk about the horror of the war. He hasn't used the word that I did, that monstrous, but he clearly feels that way, and he wants to end it. He wants to make the big deal. So I don't feel dismissive of that. I do think the idea of rewarding the aggressor and punishing the people who so bravely resisted aggression is just totally wrong. While I'm expressing sympathy for the idea, and it's something that we'll regret for decades if it's done. FDR said of Pearl Harbor was a day that lived in infamy. Well, helping Russia suppress, brutally steal Ukraine's sovereignty would live in infamy. I wrote that in a column 2 days ago. So, one thing that I'll say is that the idea that a part of Ukraine, most of Ukraine, would survive and prosper behind an armistice line the way South Korea has survived and prospered is not the worst outcome. The worst outcome is just unspeakable slaughter and the gradual destruction of Ukraine. That's not to be desired. So, long answer, but those are my thoughts. Yes, ma'am. Pontificate is not the word. I know so little about Venezuela. The one, pontification I'd make is that I just don't see this in our world as a significant national security threat.
I don't either, but, you know, we've cleared out the embassies, we've done all this stuff, and everybody's clearing out.
Yep. Well, they're setting it up for, you know, presidents like quick, winnable wars, right? I mean, you know, President Reagan, venerated these days, was a president who was involved in Lebanon. He was president when that embassy was blown up. He was president when that Marine barracks was blown up. And he decided, I'm out of here. And then he decided to invade Grenada. You know, not exactly a big prime strategic target, but boy, that was a war that we could win. Anyway, I just think every aspect of this bothers me. The legality, the misuse of national security resources. I don't get it, but you know, that's the limit of my pontification. Yes, sir. Yes.
I was wondering if you could comment about a war, technological war involving infrastructure. This idea that people put out that it isn't going to be bombs, they're going to be in our cities, but just all these systems, these technological systems that we trust on every day are suddenly going to disappear.
If people in the back couldn't hear that, we probably should pass the microphone. So the question was, what about infrastructure war? War not on people, but on everything that we touch, everything that allows normal life to happen. I mean, you know, the Chinese and the Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon operations that are known about somewhat, but not enough, have prepared to do exactly that. I mean, think about how quickly ordinary life would cease if, you know, banking systems went down, cash wasn't available, electricity stopped, you know, travel on the highways was impossible because you couldn't get fuel for vehicles. I mean, you know, how quickly the country would be in a state of complete paralysis. You wouldn't have to fire a shot. And the ability, it's said, much of the ability to do that is already in place in malware that's already been inserted in systems and is ready to be turned on. I mean, this is really spooky, but it's, you know, it's in the newspapers. So I mean, one of the things that really bothers me about spending so much time worrying about Venezuela and related issues of, you know, narcotics, you know, shipments, is that it diverts resources to focus on real threats like this that are really, you know, fundamentally threaten our country's ability to operate. And, you know, the people who could be working on this are doing other things. You know, the FBI, the Justice Department, the CIA. So that bugs me a lot. Let me go to people in the back. Yes, ma'am. You go.
Hi, David. How are you?
Yeah, good.
My name's Teresa Boisseau, and I actually ran for Congress last year because of what you're talking about in your book. It takes me back to a movie that was out in the 90s, Sneakers, with Robert Redford and Sidney Poitier, and a line that the character said, future warfare is not going to be about traditional warfare, but the bits and the bytes and who controls the information. So my question is related to that. It might be something you and your wife could both answer. We knew about these problems over 30 years ago, and why we're just now coming up to speed on needing defense and technology. That's question number one. There might be things in place that we don't know about. But the other thing is, I'm really frustrated that we've given as much power as we have to someone, say, like Elon Musk and Starlink, and that comes from Congress. And we've allowed him to have that much control over our lives and those of the people, say, like in Ukraine and stuff. And can we now set up some sort of guardrails to take back that power moving forward?
So those are super powerful questions. why did it take so long to focus on this? One simple answer is that the internet was created with America's lovable generosity and naivete. These systems were open. They weren't built with defense, protection, control in mind. They were built with openness in mind. The whole idea was, these systems will be wide open for the world. You remember the early optimism. The internet will be transformational because everyone will have access to information, and information will set the world free, and we'll live in this info paradise. Well, it sort of worked out the opposite. The countries that have free and open information increasingly are paralyzed and, in political chaos, and the companies that control information are, have much tighter control than they ever did. So I think that'd be my first answer, that it was just designed without thinking about what would happen. It's a good lesson to always red team everything. Think about the worst. Think about how the worst could happen and then design systems so you don't get to the worst. On power to these private tech billionaires, I've written about this in regards to Starlink because our dependence on Starlink, the Ukrainians' dependence on Starlink is so overwhelming. What would they do if Elon turned off the switch, which he's threatened to do, as you probably know? And the government's answer was in part to have a contract for government Starlink access, which is a separate, non-commercial contract. I actually think that the ability of our tech sector to innovate is so powerful. Look at AI. If the government was running AI, just to put it mildly, we wouldn't be where we are now. And so I want that energy. I just think we need very, very smart people with a lot of confidence to establish, I was going to say controls, but it's really a conversation. If you try to control this stuff, it'll slip out through, I think controls are not the right answer. There is increasingly in the tech world, I think, a national security consensus. Alex Karp, the head of Palantir, has become somebody I know very well. And Alex would say that Palantir really has led the way. Palantir has made so much money. Alex thinks just sheer greed is making people think, I want to be in the defense sector. Anduril is an incredibly innovative company making new weapon systems, at a speed that Lockheed Martin would take, a generation to do. They do in a year. So I want to hold on to that energy. I want those people to keep working with the government, but we just need really good people in the government to see it, know it, and ideally control it. Yes, ma'am.
You've spoken of things like so much about destruction and control and the weightiness of war, and you're also a very considerate author. Perhaps this is a philosophical question, but why is perhaps humanity's focus so much on the downhill instead of the utilization of these for the powerful? Do you have any thoughts or comments?
So, I take, we ought to reread Genesis. I mean it. Our difficulty discriminating between good and evil, or understanding what evil consequences come from innocent acts. It's just, it's the story of mankind. And I probably should end here, Melanie. We're at 3:00. Thinking, I'm sick of writing all these novels about war and weapons and spies. I want to write a real novel. So I did. I wrote a novel called The Sun King, and it was a very romantic, and I thought, really moving, powerful novel about human emotions and what love really is. And so I got a note after that book was published, and the note said, "Dear Mr. Ignatius, I read your book, Body of Lies. On the strength of that, I bought The Sun King. I want my money back." So, so thank you very much.